Matt Schaff of DraftSharks.com here with Jared Smola and Shane Hallam, and we are going to run through a 10-team PPR mock draft on Sleeper. If you play in a 12-team league and not 10, we did one of those late last week. You can find that on our YouTube channel right now. And really, odds are you can find a full draft guide article that fits your format on DraftSharks.com right now. We recently updated those for 8-team, for 10-team, for 12-team, and 14-team leagues. We hit PPR, non-PPR, half PPR. We've got a Superflex edition coming out later this week, along with another round of updates to all of the existing articles. Why update those? Because we are really getting into the thick of draft season now. That's why we're doing this show. That's why we're reading camp reports every day. It's why Jared is watching replays of every preseason game so that I don't have to, and posting his fantasy takeaways every week on DraftSharks.com. You can find a fresh one of those on the site right now. Jared, what's one key takeaway from this most recent weekend of games?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the most interesting stuff is happening in Denver. And I don't want to talk about Marvin Mims. If you want to read about Marvin Mims, check out the article. I want to talk about the backfield because Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin were the only running backs that played with Bo Nix in the second preseason game. No Samaje Perine, no Audric Estime. If that sticks and it's just a two-man backfield, I think both Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin could end up being pretty solid picks at their ADPs right now.
Yeah, and I think that they both have been pretty solid picks at ADP and guys that I need to talk myself into drafting some. I've already done that with Williams. We've been doing it some with McLaughlin in especially best ball. Shane, have you been getting shares of that Denver backfield?
Yeah, I draft a lot of Javonte early, and then I've been pivoting to McLaughlin. He's just super cheap. He catches passes. It's like there's a floor there and a ceiling there. So like Jared said, if it's two-man backfield, McLaughlin's going to get, I think, a ton of passes. We even saw in the preseason game, Bo Nix loves to check it down screens. That they seem to be working to his advantages as a quarterback.
I think I'm also get different shares of how I pronounce his name. Jaleel McLaughlin, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jaleel McLaughlin. I'm just going to mix it up so that people have no idea who I'm talking about, or so that they all know who I'm talking about, no matter how they say it. And even though you don't want to talk Marvin Mims, Jared, I feel like I should, because I've talked him up plenty as a sleeper option. And the news on him is that he's not getting starter reps right now. Just because he's doing that in the preseason doesn't mean that's how it'll happen all season long, but it's certainly not a good sign that in the second preseason game, he's playing behind Tim Patrick and Josh Reynolds, neither of whom were on the field last season. Tim Patrick was hurt. Josh Reynolds was in Detroit. So they have both been added to the mix and are currently playing ahead of Marvin Mims. So, I talked him up as a sleeper, saying all along that he was going so late that it was low risk, even if it didn't work out. Doesn't look like he's going to help you, especially early in the season. So I would back off of drafting him now. If you have seen some of those other takes, I'm personally backing off drafting him because I already got all my shares. I'm pretty much set with however it goes from here on. But, those kinds of developments are why we watch the preseason and why the takeaways are worth reading. It's why we're pumping out all these shark bites as we get closer to the season and constantly updating the projections so that when we see players who aren't playing as much as we expected or are playing more than we expected or who got hurt, like Jaylen Warren this past weekend, all those things require updates. We're updating the projections. And of course, those projections are going to feed the rankings in your draft war room. And that's what we're going to be using to assist with the mock draft we're doing today. So with that said, let me go ahead and bring up the sleeper draft room that we are using. And I'm going to go ahead and sync my draft war room to this particular draft. I've already got boards here, but I'm going to add a new one for this mock draft that we're doing. I hit add league. I hit sync your league. And I go to Sleeper, which is already open in my browser, as you saw from the draft room. We're doing the 10-team August mock draft here, and it's as simple as that. Let's go into the scoring settings, and we'll look at what we're playing with here. We've got 10 teams. I'm drafting 9th in this one. I drafted 1st in the other one, so I'm looking forward to a different experience in this particular draft. We've got 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end in the lineup. We've got 6 bench spots. We're not going to be drafting kickers and defenses here for this particular mock, but we'll talk a little bit at the end of this episode about how the draft war room is set to help you with even those positions. They're really often overlooked when we're talking about draft strategy. We've got the 1 flex here, running back, wide receiver, tight end, scoring pretty standard, 1 point per 25 yards passing, 4 points per passing touchdown, -1 for interceptions. It's bad news for Jameis Winston if he gets on the field this year. Point per 10 yards rushing and receiving, 6 points for receiving and rushing touchdowns, PPR scoring for wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. So all looks good in the settings. Let's jump into the war room. All right. So we've got Shane up first in this one. And as I switch over to my sleeper draft room, I've got the Draft Shark sidebar right here. So I don't have to go back to the draft war room tab. If I don't want to, I can, because there's full functionality there as opposed to just the pick recommendations in the sidebar. But if I'm on the clock and it's running down and I just want a quick view of who I should pick, it's sitting right there for me. So Shane's up at the 4 spot. We had CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey go. Shane, who are you taking fourth?
Draft war room here has some good recommendations. Obviously, receiver at 104, where we start 3, I think is where you got to go. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. I like them both at this 104 spot. I think I'm going to go Justin Jefferson, even with the JJ McCarthy injury. I think that Jefferson we saw Nick Mullins support him last year when he was healthy. Like a healthy Jefferson for the entire season. I'll take a shot on Jefferson here over Chase.
Jared, who are you taking 6th?
I thought I was going to have a bit of a debate between Breece Hall and Amon-Ra St. Brown, but with Breece Hall coming off the board before me, this is a pretty easy pick. Jamar Chase, I think, like Shane said, he's kind of right there with me with Jefferson as that pick at the 4 or 5. So I feel like I'm getting a 1-pick discount here. Jamar Chase, stay healthy, keep Joe Burrow healthy. I think, Chase is one of the 4 receivers, I think, that have a chance to lead all receivers in PPR points this year.
Now, Jared, is it easily for you, Jamar Chase, ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown there?
It is. Yeah, there's a bit of a tier break for me there. I just think Chase wins on upside. St. Brown is as safe as they come, returning to the same offense with the same quarterback. Basically the Lions just returning everything from last year, which makes Brown safe. But I think Chase, again, has that upside to lead all receivers in PPR points.
What about if Jefferson were still there? Say St. Brown went 4 to Shane. It was Chase versus Jefferson. Where you at?
Our projections have Jefferson slightly ahead still. I would just trust those and take Jefferson. But again, there's no issue if you want to take Chase. I think where Jefferson wins is on target projection, right? He does not have a T. Higgins there to contend with for targets. I think Jefferson's a better bet to out-target Chase this year.
And Shane, let's say you had 10 drafts with all 3 of these guys facing you. You've got Jefferson, Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. How would you break down how many times you would pick each of those players, even if it's 0 for one of those 3?
I think I would probably split Chase and Jefferson evenly, probably 4 and 4. I'd really have them 50-50, like Jared said. I think Jefferson gets the targets. I think Chase, now playing a little more out of the slot, has a little bit more upside, potentially with Joe Burrow. And then I would take Amon-Ra St. Brown probably in 2 of those drafts, about 20%, just to diversify a bit and get a little bit of that safety that Chase and Jefferson may have a little bit lower floor.
I think that's fair. I think it would be fair if you say 3-3-3 and then the last one's a toss-up. Maybe that one's Breece Hall, just to mix it up some. These guys are not separated by a whole lot. Obviously, we're talking about round 1, so most guys are not separated by a whole lot. But all 3 of those guys, not just attractive, but I think all 3 of them, to me, passing on any one of them, you're like, oh man, what might I miss out on by not having this guy? So it's understandable if you have that feeling. They're all 3 good. There's really not a bad choice among the 3, even if you're like, I like Amon-Ra St. Brown better than those other 2 because he's safer. Now we're to me at the 9 spot, and don't be thrown off by the team names up here. The league was set first and then the order randomized. We'll talk about our draft slots as we go. Number 9, I'm taking Bijan Robinson. It's close between him and Garrett Wilson. I feel better about Bijan Robinson now than I did earlier in draft season, and we'll see if I'm wrong, but I think that there's a gap between him and the other running backs coming up. Jahmyr Gibbs, I don't think is going to get enough work to be on the same level with Bijan Robinson. He probably shouldn't relative to each other. I think we should get a whole lot more touches for Robinson in Atlanta than Gibbs in Detroit. So that separates them. Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley are not far behind and should be workhorses for their teams. I don't know about their receiving workloads, though, both playing with rushing quarterbacks and both playing with quarterbacks who will steal goal line touchdowns from them. So I like Robinson there, and I'm okay with waiting and seeing what happens at wide receiver for me. Shane, before we get any further into this one, are there any overarching differences for you in a 10-team draft versus a 12-teamer?
I think when you look at leagues that have less teams, those of us, we've all played in 10-team leagues and 12-team leagues. Probably a lot of people watching have played in both. Those 10-team leagues, the teams tend to look better. And so when you can get some type of positional advantage, I think it is huge. And so to me, quarterback and tight end, even though you're only starting one of each, it's okay to reach a little bit on that top quarterback or that top tight end, because you're going to have a positional advantage week to week over your other teams. The receivers or running backs are going to all look pretty similar in a 10-team league, Whereas in a 12-teamer, if you start passing on receiver, you can end up with a lot of garbage at the receiver position. So and I wrote the 8-team draft guide on the website. That's even more important in that type of league. So I think the less teams you have in your league, the more important some of those one-off positions become. So if I can win every week at tight end and quarterback, I could probably use the waiver wire, cobble together good running back or receiver units in a 10-team.
Totally agree. I wouldn't say you have to make sure to get a certain elite player at those positions, but I'm more willing to go get one of those top level, or a guy I think is going to be a top level at one of those positions, the fewer teams that are in the league, for just the reasons you said. I didn't show it at the time, so I'll go back and show it real quick now, but Bijan Robinson did lead Garrett Wilson in the 3D values at my turn, so I was following what the board said and taking Robinson over Garrett Wilson. Now let's switch back for my pick in round 2, and let's bring out the sidebar to see what it recommends. Just the player that I was thinking about, Puka Nacua. The risk here, of course, he's coming off a knee injury. We don't know at the moment whether he's going to be ready for week 1, but he should be. So I'm going to go with that for now, and we'll obviously keep watching it and update it as needed. Jared, who are you taking in round 2?
Yeah, this is going to be Jonathan Taylor for me. And I totally agree with all the stuff Shane mentioned about quarterbacks and tight ends, the elite ones gaining some value in 10-team leagues. I even think, even at running back, it's slightly less so, but, I can afford to, maybe if this is a 12-team league, I do take someone like Drake London here, but in a 10-team league with, the wide receiver pool even deeper, I want to get one of those, truly elite 3-down running backs. That's Jonathan Taylor. I do think, he's in for a ton of work this year. There's really no clear-cut number 2 running back in Indianapolis. So JT, as long as he's healthy, should be in for a ton of work.
Yeah, and Shane, you mentioned the one starter positions, but it's true at the other positions as well. You still want elite players at the multiple starter positions because, building out a terrific set of 3 wide receivers is not going to have as much impact here because people are all more likely to have a pretty good set of wide receivers.
I think the other thing with those is you can take a little bit of risk. If a player gets hurt, you mentioned Puka Nacua might miss week 1, you're going to be able to make up for that. I think you could take a risk on, hey, I'm going to swing for some upside to get a guy that has elite running back potential that might outscore the rest of my league.
Shane, who you got here at the 207?
Yeah, I think I'm going to kind of take my own advice here and take a player that has tremendous upside, but maybe has some of that injury risk, and that's Kyron Williams, the running back for the Los Angeles Rams. We saw what he did on a per-game basis, has dealt with a lot of foot and lower body issues. But, if he misses a couple games, that's fine with me. I can definitely fill in the spot. And if he blows up, then that's a win at that positional advantage in 10-team league.
Back to you in the 3rd with nothing crazy. Haven't left the board in the meantime. What you got at 304?
I think I'm going to go with Jalen Waddle, the wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins here, is at the top of the war room. I agree with the assessment. I just think he has a ton of upside. If Tyreek Hill were to get hurt, Waddle would absolutely explode. And as a wide receiver too in a 10-team league, I think there's worse you can do, especially with the 2 tight ends, Laporte and Kelsey, going off the board. I was considering them. Since they're gone, I'll go with Waddle.
Yeah, the computers know, like we do, that you get a little bit more for having an elite player at one of those positions. And as you saw in the sidebar, when Shane took Jalen Waddle, it automatically updated, took him off, moved the wide receivers up. Looks like it's going to be a wide receiver for me when we get there as well. But let's see what Jared's doing at the 306 first.
And I'm going to take one before you can get him. I'm going to go Nico Collins here, who was our guy last year. Cover boy, the sleeper article. What was he, a 12th rounder last year? You got to take him a lot earlier this year, but I think Nico Collins in the 3rd round is just fine. We've seen in the preseason, we'll see if this carries over into the regular season, but the Texans were one of those teams last year that rotated wide receivers a bit more than we'd like. Nico Collins, despite the huge year, his route rate was not elite. It was not in that 90% range we see a lot of those guys in. This preseason, he's been playing nearly every single snap with CJ Stroud, obviously despite the addition of Steph Diggs and Tank Dell being there still. So if Collins does get a slight boost in playing time this year, he could be in for an even bigger year.
And Shane mentioned how in a smaller league, it's easier to take some risk on maybe an injury guy. It's also easier to take a risk on somebody whose role we don't really know. Nico Collins has a wide range of outcomes from there. Little easier to bet on the high side of that here, Jared, because you can get more reinforcements in case he doesn't work out, right?
For sure, exactly.
I've got wide receivers at the top of mine, Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk ahead of Cooper Kupp in the 3D values. And let's look at why real quick. All things being equal, if we're just looking at fantasy point projections, we've got Cooper Kupp ahead of both San Francisco 49ers. But The ceilings are good on the other two, and the ADPs say that Cooper Kupp's going to stay on the board longer. Now, we don't know for sure that that's going to happen, but that is factored into the 3D value. If the board is reading, hey, you can take Debo here and still have a shot at Cooper Kupp next round, then it's going to go ahead and pump up the 49ers player and say, go ahead, get that one here, wait next round, you can still get that other guy. And, especially when we get into a range where there might be 2 or even 3 rounds of difference between those players, that can be a key point, because why take a guy 3 rounds earlier than you need to if you can take a good player and then still get that other guy?
We tried to make the draft war room as close to how we draft as possible. And that's a big thing for me. Every time I'm on the clock, not only am I looking at who the best players are at this current pick, I'm trying to, game out who are the best players going to be available next time I come on the clock. All that is definitely built into the war room. And that's the only reason why Kupp shows up behind these Niners receivers right here. Because like you said, Matt, we do have Kupp projected as a better play than those other two, but he's more likely to make it back to your next pick.
Yeah. And if you saw my sidebar earlier, I was like, okay, it looks like I'm going to be taking Cooper Kupp. And then it got to my turn and it changed the order of those guys, because now it's reading that it's my turn. It's reading those other factors beyond just the projected points. Fortunately, the current arrangement lines up with what I like, and I want to get some Deebo Samuel. We've had Brandon Ayuk on the sideline for a long time now. Deebo Samuel has been good even when Brandon Ayuk's been on the field, so it's not like he needs that much help, but it's just a little bit of extra. So I'm taking Deebo in round 3. ADP held up. Cooper Kupp makes it to me in round 4, and the draft war room's like, see, told you can wait and get Cooper Kupp there. I'd be fine if you're like, I really want Malik Neighbors. Fine, take him over Cooper Kupp. I'm a Cooper Kupp guy, so I'm going to go ahead and take him here, and I'm going to smile about the start that gives me Bijan Robinson. Actually, you know what? We'll leave that for the purposes of this mock, because I think the value is fine. If I had a team with Puka Nacua already on it, I'm not taking Cooper Kupp in that spot. So I was so busy talking about it that I didn't even look at my own team structure. So value-wise, I think Cooper Kupp makes sense there. If I have a team with Puka already on it, not taking his teammate 2 rounds later for a regular lineup setting format. What about you guys?
I'm not opposed to it. If they're the 2 best values, I think the spots you got, Kupp especially, I think was a really strong value. And this is a Rams team, and we saw last year, Kupp and Nacua accounting for, over 50% of their total targets, a lot of games. So I think it's plenty possible that both of those guys pay off those price tags.
I think if this would be a best ball, then I'd feel really good about both. Like, take them. If you have one blow up one week, one the next week, then it's fine. Yeah, lineup setting, I think it's a little harder to swallow. I probably would have went Neighbors instead.
Yeah, that's where I would go. Jared, what are you doing in round 4 here?
Yeah, so Neighbors is very appealing here. I want to make sure I lock up one of those elite tight ends like we talked about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and take Mark Andrews here, who we do have ranked slightly ahead of Trey McBride. Andrews obviously missed a bunch of time last year, but when he was on the field, he continued to be one of the most efficient tight ends in the NFL on a per route basis. He continued to be one of the most productive tight ends in fantasy football. So I feel good about getting Andrews here, and especially again in this 10-team league where it's a bit deeper at the other positions.
Shane, what you got in round 4?
I think it's a tough choice here. I could definitely go Neighbors as well and kind of keep going with the upside. The Jefferson, Waddle, Neighbors trio would be interesting, but I'm kind of leaning the way Jared is to lock up some of those other positions and feel good about it. And since I have 2 of the 3 teams behind me have already taken a tight end, I'm gonna go with the elite quarterback. I'm gonna go with our top quarterback, Jalen Hurts, who has the rushing upside, has the passing upside.
And that drafter right behind you was probably waiting for Jalen Hurts and had to settle for Patrick Mahomes since you sniped him. So what are you coming back with in round 5?
Well, Malik Neighbors is still there, so I was obviously considering him the round before. I'll gladly take the value here in the early 5th round for an upside rookie who I think is going to get well over 100 targets this season.
Yeah, I don't think you should count on Malik Neighbors sticking around to this level, but the ADP that we're getting so far for this format says that he's getting here. I think it's possible, because there are plenty of people who are like, yeah, he might be good, but Daniel Jones sucks. He's going to kill him this year. If Malik Neighbors gets in round 5, Jared, I think we're all certainly on board with picking him, right?
Yeah, I think you're going to see him fall in some of your home leagues, right? Just for the reasons you mentioned, like Giants wide receiver. No one's seen him do it yet, in a real NFL game. So I could see Neighbors, getting to round 4, even round 5 in a 10-team league. I'm going to look wide receiver here. I think running back looks a little flatter than wide receiver. I think I can get a solid running back coming back around. I'm going to take T. Higgins here. I let Matt have him in our 12-team mock draft. I want to get some T. Higgins in one of these fake drafts. Sets up a potential Joe Burrow stack later for me, which I'm never opposed to doing.
Jared is nothing if not generous in fake drafts. I think everybody should know that. If you take nothing else away from these mocks, know his generosity. I got Joe Mixon looking at me. I already have 3 wide receivers. I have 1 running back, and I have no problem with taking the Texans running back here. He didn't play in the second preseason game because of the hamstring thing, but he's been practicing with it, so it's not an issue at this point. We'll watch him heading into the season to make sure it's still not an issue, but I like Joe Mixon as my second running back. I like him as a way to buy into that Houston offense, and I have no problem going with a Philly receiver as my next pick in round 6. Devontae Smith's top of my board, ahead of a couple more running backs. You could take one of those guys if you want. Like I said, I already have 3 starters at wide receiver, but I'm wearing an Eagles shirt right now, so I might as well take Devontae Smith. I'm curious to see if he gets closer to A.J. Brown in target share this year under a new OC, if the usage changes a little bit, and throws him some more shorter range targets. I'm really just intrigued to see what happens under Kellen Moore this year in Philly.
Yeah, and Smith was the guy I was considering right alongside there with T. Higgins. I think you can go either way with those 2 guys, both kind of the 1Bs on a really strong passing game. So I think that was a nice value pick there for you, Matt. I wanted Ken Walker. That was, Mixon and Walker were the 2 running backs I was hoping would make it back to me. Walker goes, obviously. I'm going to keep pushing running back in that case, though, and I'm going to go ahead and take Rashid Rice here, who is kind of moving up our rankings slowly. Every day that goes by where he doesn't get that suspension, you start thinking, maybe it's not going to come until 2025. And, Rice is a guy where if you tell me he's eligible for all 17 games, like he should be a guy probably going in round 3 of a 10-team draft. So I'm definitely getting a nice discount on him here.
He was often going in round 2 in the earliest best ball picks before there was any of the offseason stuff. So yeah, the closer we get to the season, the better he is as a value, I think. Shane, who do you have in round 6?
Well, I'm going to keep pushing the injured running back train of guys that have high probabilities for injuries. I'm going to take James Conner here as my RB2 in the 6th round on a per game basis. He was an RB1 last year, and that's really, once again, all I need. We'll have the depth at running back. It will be there, and James Conner can lock it down until he gets hurt.
Yeah, you just hope that he and Kyron Williams don't miss the same 3 games this year.
Right. As long as they split that up, my team's golden. So as long as I have to replace one at a time, and even if both, I think later in this draft I'll be looking at maybe a little more consistency at running back just in case.
So we're using the draft war room to help us mock on Sleeper right now, but you can actually do mock drafts directly from DraftSharks.com from your synced board using your exact league settings. Instead of clicking into the draft war room, you would just click into the mock draft. There you go. You get your own board where you can make all the picks. You'll be drafting against 9 computers. So you will have picks made according to not only our rankings, but also, consensus rankings, ADP. So it's not like it's just going to straight pick down the Draft Sharks rankings, because that's not going to give you a good look at a mock draft. You can move players around. You can go back and change your picks to see how things might differ. We want you to take as many shots at the format as you can, as you want to, before the real thing, so you're ready to dominate when you get to your real draft. Back to Shane for his round 7 pick in this draft. Shane, what are we looking at here?
I think I'm going to keep pushing tight end off a little bit. I think there's still a couple of guys I like that I can hope one gets back to me here. So I'm going to fill out the flex with another wide receiver. I'm going to go with Chris Godwin. He's the top of my draft war room. I really like the sleeper potential for Godwin, who I think is going to score a lot more touchdowns than he did last season, where he's super inefficient there. And we know those touchdowns can vary. So I love having him as a flex. I can just kind of plug and forget about.
And I would easily take Godwin straight up. I guess easily might be a little strong, but I would take Godwin ahead of both Keenan Allen and George Pickens, easily ahead of Allen, honestly, and ahead of George Pickens as well. And I think he's at least even with Christian Kirk in terms of what we should expect from those players. So I really like Godwin as a draft value, really across formats this year.
Yeah, he's just a classic touchdown regression guy, right? Only scored twice last year. Everything else was like a top 25 level producer as a wide receiver. So get a little better touchdown luck for Godwin this year. And I think he's going to end up being a big value. I'm on the clock here. I was hoping Anthony Richardson got back to me didn't happen. I am still going to go quarterback here with Joe Burrow. Get the Burrow-Higgins stack, which we actually talked about on our top stacks video. The Bengals offense is just an easy bounce back bet this year with better health from those key players like Burrow, like T. Higgins. Running back still looks pretty flat to me. Another thing I'm looking at here too is 3 of the 4 teams picking behind me, at this turn don't have a quarterback yet. So we might see some quarterbacks start to come off the board here. So I'm going to go ahead and lock up Burrow.
You have Jamar Chase too, so.
And I have Chase too. Exactly, Shane. See, you're paying more attention than I am.
Look at us loading up on wide receivers from the same team inadvertently. It's really maybe it's a subtle strategy that even we didn't realize we were deploying this year. I'm up 709. I've got 4 wideouts, 2 running backs. Let's see what the draft war room suggests. We got Rhamondre Stevenson, David Montgomery up top, then Evan Engram, Dak Prescott, some running backs. I don't think that there's really a whole lot between Stevenson, Montgomery, and the others. So I'm going to go for that middle recommendation. I like Evan Engram. I like the consistent targets there. I like the floor for this PPR format. And I like that he's the 7th. Yeah, he's the 7th tight end off the board here. So I'll take value there and then see what the board says to me coming back around. Stevenson again, that's fine. I don't want to overplay any dislike for Stevenson. I mean, clearly he got paid. So the Patriots want to give him the ball plenty. They plan to give him the ball plenty. Antonio Gibson is a challenge to the receiving work. We'll see exactly what the playing time looks like. But when the Patriots pay a running back $9 million a year on an extension, I'm going to assume that they're telling me at least something with that contract.
I'm the same way with Stevenson, where every time he's at the top of my draft war room, it's like, I don't really want to click the button. But then you think, there's a lot that goes into these projections that fuel these rankings. And yes, the Patriots offense is not going to be good. Yes, the offensive line is a concern, but Stevenson at this level, this 8th round price tag, he is a good touch bet for this price tag. And we know volume rules everything at running back. So I do think Stevenson is a fine pick, even though he's not exciting.
So who you got here in round 8?
I'm going to go with another running back who I kind of thought I was going to be out on this year, but his ADP I can't be out on him. It's Raheem Mostert. I get that he's old. I get that he's had trouble staying healthy throughout his career. I get that he's not going to match last year's touchdown total, but all that is more than baked into his ADP here, especially early in the season when he's healthy. He's going to be producing for me. Maybe he gets nicked up later in the year, but I can, use my running back depth. I can use the waiver wire to sort of, work around that. So I think Raheem Mostert in the 8th round, just too tough to pass up.
If you like watching live mock drafts like this one, like the 12-teamer we did last week, if you like hearing the player discussion as we go through, if you like to make fun of us when we accidentally take 2 wide receivers from the same team, subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel. We're putting out at least 2 videos every week. We have been for a while now. We will throughout the regular season. We've got, not just these mock drafts too. You'll find sleepers, you'll find draft guide, best draft position, IDP stuff. If you're into that, like I am, it's all available for you on the channel. So subscribe. You'll find out when we have new videos drop, and you can find pretty much whatever you need to help you win, because that's what we're trying to deliver here. Shane, what's the next pick for you to try to win this pretend league?
Sometimes these computer players or in your home league might take that second tight end. I'm not going to risk it here. I'm going to take Jake Ferguson, the tight end from the Dallas Cowboys, as a consistent presence, the number 2 target on the Cowboys team. It's top tight end in the draft war room for me. So happy to grab him here.
Yeah. And I mean, you say it jokingly about computer players, but there are things like that happen in your home leagues. You might say, oh, those other 3 teams already have tight ends. I'm good. I can wait until the next turn to get one. That is not necessarily the case. All it takes is one Dallas fan or one idiot who had no tight ends last year and thinks that he's going to fix last year by getting 2 tight ends this year. I mentioned to you guys, I just had my home draft last night, and before the end of the night in this non-PPR league, somebody traded Sam Laporta straight up to get Dontavian Wicks. And even Jared noted Dontavian Wicks poet. He stands on the corner of his town and speaks sonnets about Dontavian Wicks. And even he was like, that should be vetoed because that doesn't make any sense. So crazy stuff happens. If you are like, I want to get Jake Ferguson or I'm going to be mad, you go ahead and take him. All right, Shane, who you got in round 9?
Like I said, my running backs, Kyron Williams, James Conner, there's some potential injuries. So I'm going to kind of flip the script and get a guy that's top of the war room, upside mode. And our draft war room's turned on. I went upside at in this late positions of the draft. Guy that's not going to play the first couple weeks. So hopefully by the time Connor gets hurt or Kyron Williams gets hurt, Jonathan Brooks, the running back for the Carolina Panthers, will be back on the field. And I can use him as the plugin for those players.
Shane talking about upside mode, which, as you can see on your screen now, it did switch on automatically at this point in the draft. And we can hover over that and see what upside mode is. And the Draft War Room tells you it gauges two things: a player's ceiling and the likelihood of him hitting that ceiling. So we now weight those two things more strongly because we are in the second half of this draft. And the further you get into the draft, Jared, the more you should be weighting those things, the more you should be chasing the upside of a player and not worrying about the downside risk, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, I mean, we talked about how the draft forum is going to bake in ADP with its player suggestions because that's how we draft. That's how we recommend drafting. Same deal with this upside thing. Like the later you get in drafts, the more ceiling matters and the more risk does not matter, because a lot of these double-digit round guys are really just going to end up on the waiver wire anyways, right? Because a lot of these guys are not going to work out. So you want to be pinpointing the guys where if they do hit, they're actually going to make a difference for your fantasy team. That's exactly what upside mode does. So I loved Shane's Jonathan Brooks pick. I had Brooks and one other running back kind of at the top of my queue here. I'm going to take the other guy. That's Javonte Williams. We talked at the top of the show about how we saw just Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin getting work with the first team offense. I think that's a very bullish sign for both those guys. To me, Javonte Williams is still the guy. Like McLaughlin's a fun little player. And when I say little, I mean little, right? Like he's not going to be a guy that handles 15 plus touches per game, at least on a weekly basis. Maybe he gets there a time or two, but Javonte Williams is the guy in this Broncos backfield, has lead back size, has 3-down ability. Again, not to say he's going to dominate the work here, but Williams is the guy who can get, 250 plus touches this season. If that happens in this Broncos backfield under Sean Payton, who, Payton always has productive backfields, I still really like the upside on Javonte Williams.
I think it might be worth noting that fun little guy is probably like exactly the same size as Jared. So maybe I'll start referring to Jared that way. All right, I'm up at the 909, and if you were looking at the sidebar as my turn was approaching, you saw Jaden Daniels up top. He's not there anymore. Like I said, there are other factors at play. We've got Deontay Johnson up top, and I've been talking about Deontay Johnson for most of the offseason, so I'm going to go ahead and ride that one and take him as my fifth receiver on this team, I believe, with, of course, no holes at the other spots. Fortunately, I don't have to be able to spell Deontay to draft him, and it's helpful that the Draft War Room shows me how to spell his name, just in case I'm having trouble typing while talking. You won't have to talk through your draft. Now we're around the turn, and now I've got our boy Jaden Daniels up top. You can see by the lightning bolt that we are big fans of Jaden Daniels. You should have been able to tell if you have been reading or listening to anything we've put out so far this year. You can see other icons like Values, Sleeper next to Chase Brown and Austin Eckler down here. So, just quick little looks to show you how we feel about a player. There was the red cross against a player who's no longer in my board here, but that says injury risk. So, again, just a quick look that lets you know somebody that we either really like or that you should wonder about. I'm going to follow the recommendation again here. Take Jaden Daniels. If you like Jordan Love more, fine. I'm going to go ahead and chase the rushing upside and the deep passing upside with Jaden Daniels, who, by the way, has been generating buzz left and right in practices and preseason games. Like every time I read one, I'm like, all right, I got to step away from my computer, take a deep breath, maybe grab an ice cube and put it down my shirt because it's getting a little bit exciting.
Yeah, he's looked so professional in his first two preseason games, just like calm, cool. He knows where he's going with the ball, the rushing ability. We've already seen it. It seems like the Commanders are ready to take advantage of that rushing ability. So super excited about Jaden Daniels. I kind of hope they just put him on ice now for this third preseason game. Keep him healthy. Don't let him make any more highlight reel plays. We can keep getting him at a discount here.
Yeah, I agree. If they do play him in this game, might be like, we got new coaches in Washington, but we got the same kind of decision making. Jared, what you got in round 10?
Yeah, look at Jaylen Warren falling down the board here with this hamstring injury. Warren expected to miss multiple weeks with a hammy suffered in that second preseason game. Might not even play week one, but that's okay. He's my fourth running back here. I'm not going to need him week one. I think this is a pretty solid injury discount.
Yeah, I won't argue with that, especially as a fourth running back. Shane, what do you got?
I'm going to take Jackson Smith and Jigba here at the top of my Draft War Room. It's okay, just swing for upside with my fifth wide receiver. If JSN doesn't work out, I can cut him, but I like him in the new offense in Seattle with Ryan Grubb. He's going to play the Jalen McMillan role in that Washington Huskies offense. McMillan dominated targets and touchdowns 2 years ago. So I think JSN's going to be a much better value than he was last year and probably going to outproduce what he did as a rookie.
That's for sure. And we have been following our steps in the Best Way to Draft article. You can find, if you just search Best Way to Draft, you're going to find our Best Way to Draft article with overall draft tips that you can really apply in any format it starts with number one, know your rules. We started that at the beginning. That's why we ran through the settings, because you have to know what format you're drafting into if you're going to dominate it. Use dynamic player evaluations. You've been looking at that the entire time. That's that changing sidebar. That's the moving 3D values as we draft. Outsmart your competition by understanding positional scarcity. We've been talking about that. I asked Shane about it up top. The smaller league means you get more of an advantage by getting those elite guys because there's less positional scarcity, the fewer teams that are in your league. We're taking advantage by mock drafting right now. That's the purpose of this exercise. And then 5 is hunt for late round fantasy studs, which is what we've been talking about. It's the guy that Shane just took. And, like you said, Shane, you can get him for better value now, Jackson Smith and Jigba, than we were at this time last year, because he had a disappointing season relative to where fantasy players expected him to perform last year.
JSN, if you watched him, there were games where he looked dynamic. They just didn't use him enough because they had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Now, if we move to more of a passing offense, especially if JSN's going to move around the formation a bit, it could be pretty exciting. He could definitely pass Tyler Lockett this year.
So what you got in round 11 as we keep hunting for studs?
I'm going to keep swinging for upside in these late rounds, and I got a little sleeper icon next to Chase Brown, the running back from the Bengals name, and it looks like he is going to be the 1A to Zach Moss's 1B, so I will take the chance as my RB4 and take Chase Brown.
Jared, how do you see that backfield working out?
I think it's going to be a 50-50 split. Maybe you see Chase Brown do more of the passing game work, which probably will make him the better fantasy bet. He's obviously the more explosive player. I don't see either guy like clearly taking over, but that's fine, right? Like we're taking these guys, how good this offense should be if everyone stays healthy. I think really, Brown, especially, and even Moss could just pay off because that backfield produces enough fantasy points to kind of support both guys.
So who you got in round 11 here?
The draft war room is yelling at me to take a wide receiver, which I haven't done now since round 6. I'm going to listen. I'm going to take Christian Watson here, who he was going 5, 6, 7 rounds earlier than this last year. And, things have obviously changed. He has tougher target competition, but he also has now what looks like a top 10 NFL quarterback. Hopefully Watson's solved the hamstring issues. I still think there's, really, really big weekly upside to Watson in this passing game this year.
Agreed. And even though we're drafting from the same draft rankings, you can see it performing differently because, as Jared said, it was yelling at him to take a wide out. It's got running backs at the top of my board because I've taken more wide receivers than Jared has to this point. I mentioned that Red Cross icon. We've got that right here next to Nick Chubb because he is an injury risk. Brian Robinson Jr. is not, so I'm fine with trusting the different upside rankings here. Obviously, we all know the upside on Nick Chubb if he's healthy, but he might not be anything close to Nick Chubb at any point this year. I have 3 running backs so far. I'll go ahead and take Brian Robinson as my 4th running back. Not a huge difference between him and Chubb. Then we get down below that. Zach Charbonnet is the next running back, a bit more of a handcuff, so less likely to help me. Tyler Lockett around the turn. We've got Cortland Sutton, basically the same value. I think it's a coin flip between these guys. I don't think you can really go wrong. I'm going to go ahead and take Cortland Sutton. He's somebody that I'm trying to mix in a little bit more in best ball because I haven't taken a whole lot of Cortland Sutton. I don't think he's a special player, but he's also in a position where he doesn't have to be a special player. He's just the most experienced guy there. He was productive last year in Sean Payton's first season. He had a high touchdown rate, which I think is set to regress, but still probably the best bet to lead that team in targets for a rookie quarterback. Round 12, we're talking about my 6th receiver, so I don't really need much of a case for him.
Yeah, we mentioned that Marvin Mims is not going to be part of that rotation early on. To me, I think the fact that it's going to be Tim Patrick and Josh Reynolds sharing the field with Cortland Sutton. That's a good thing for Cortland Sutton, right? Because we kind of know what Patrick and Reynolds are. They're fine. They're steady veterans, but they're not going to command huge target shares. So you could see Sutton as a guy who's, getting 23, 24, 25% of the Broncos targets, at least out of the gate.
And not sharing the field with Jerry Jeudy for the first time in a while too. So he could be in for more target share than he's had in recent seasons.
I'm going to go ahead and take Tyler Lockett here. We love Lockett around here. I do think he's probably on the downside of his career at this point, but that's okay for a guy we're taking in round 12 here. I also like how Lockett kind of fits his teams. I do have Christian Watson, who's, volatile. I do have Rashee Rice, who, could still be suspended. So Lockett kind of gives me, more of that steadier veteran in case of emergency type of player that I can plug in at wide receiver.
I think I'll bite the bullet and I'll take the injury risk here. I'll take Nick Chubb, and this is what I like doing in 10-team leagues. I can cut Nick Chubb if he's not Nick Chubb, right? Like there's going to be a robust waiver wire more than a 12-team league, so why not take the chance? If he is old Nick Chubb, great, and if he's not, then I can cut him for someone else.
Yeah, just know that whatever your format, it's probably going to take some patience with Nick Chubb this year, and especially if you are going to be upset if you do cut him early in the season and then somebody else in your league gets him and reaps the benefit in like mid-November.
That's kind of the downside. And I think it's something that you can plan out depending on your team structure and how you build it. If you have that extra bench spot, you can kind of wait for him to have a slow start. Or if you want to just keep churning and whoever that week 1 breakout is, I think you can go either way. Yeah, we've all had that. We cut a guy a little bit too early and then gotten disappointed when they've broken out.
Shane, go ahead and make your round 13 pick. And guys, let's talk about, we're going to see the computer teams probably all take a second tight end and a second quarterback. How likely are you to take a second quarterback and or a second tight end in a 10-team format?
I generally will not take a second one. Maybe if I wait a really long time on a tight end or quarterback. Once again, the waiver wire is just going to be a little more robust, I think, for both those positions where if something doesn't work out, injury happens, you can pick someone up.
Same here. Again, we talked about ideally I want to get a high-end tight end and quarterback in a 10-team league. The reason I would take a second is if I, plan something out where, okay, these two quarterbacks kind of match up well as far as early season matchups go. I'm going to play this guy, week 1 and 3. I'm going to play this guy week 2 and 4. Then maybe I'll wait in the position, grab 2 guys. Otherwise, for the most part, going to just take one quarterback and use the waiver wire.
Yeah, I think it's also okay to do it if you're like, if your quarterback or tight end has a week 4 bye and you want to go ahead and get somebody who can fill in for that week. But otherwise, I'm with you guys. I'm more likely to do it if I waited to take that first one and then pair a couple together and see who can deliver for me. So Shane, I see you took Mike Williams. Any big words on Mike Williams?
It's one of Jared's faves, so I wanted to, though I don't think he's going to take another receiver, but I definitely follow that. Mike Williams has the number 2 receiver upside with Aaron Rodgers for the Jets. Once again, it's swinging for upside. He's coming back from an ACL, so might be another guy that's slow going that I may have to decide if I want to keep him or cut him. But as a bench player, we're swinging for upside in these last 2 rounds.
Great pick. Pick of the draft right there. Love Mike Williams. I'm going to take my RB5 here. I'm going to go with Zach Charbonnet. Everything out of Seattle this summer has been pumping up Ken Walker, which I'm kind of buying into. I do not think Charbonnet is going to be a standalone fantasy play. I do think he's still one of the best handcuffs in fantasy football, though. Good talent, clear number 2. If Ken Walker goes down this season, like Zach Charbonnet is going to dominate work in that Seahawks backfield.
I think there are a lot of fantasy players who are still looking at handcuffs as guys that they should get to ensure their own running backs, but there's more value in getting other teams running backs because you're already losing a bunch of value if your starter goes down, stepping down to that number 2 running back. And then you're also giving up a bit more value in the uncertainty in a lot of cases of that next guy actually taking on the same level of role. There are a lot of times where we say this guy's the handcuff, but he doesn't actually take on the same role. So then we have to guess at whether he's valuable. We have to see whether he's productive. And ultimately, it's not giving us anything close. So you're really not helping your team by doing so. I say that, and Antonio Gibson is among the options after I already took Rhamondre Stevenson. Definitely not handcuffing Antonio Gibson to Stevenson, especially because Stevenson is my 3rd running back. But Ty Chandler is another handcuff type, but I think he's a bit more of a handcuff plus because he's on a team with Aaron Jones now. Aaron Jones has always been a share the work guy. Aaron Jones is older. Aaron Jones also sits fairly high in our injury guide rankings for most likely to miss time among running backs. So I think all those reasons make Ty Chandler a pretty solid late pick.
Chandler's one of my highest known running backs right now. For all the reasons you mentioned, Matt, I do think he's going to be involved enough where, you can use him as an RB3 in better matchups. Then obviously if Aaron Jones does go down, Chandler's the guy there.
Now we're not doing kickers and defenses in this particular draft, but of course most drafts do. And we're certainly set up to help you draft kicker or defense or both if you play with them in your league. Jared, what are we looking for in kickers? We're not just looking for the guy who kicked the most field goals last year, who scored the best last year because he kicked the long ones. What are the signals? What are the things that we're looking for in a kicker heading into the season as we pick one? And then are we looking to get one and stick with him or something else?
Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, we just want kickers on good offenses, kickers on teams that are going to score a lot of points. And I think we obviously want those points to be field goals and not extra points, but trying to predict that is kind of pointless. I think just get kickers on good offenses. Second for me, ideally, if you can get a kicker kicking inside, that's always better, right? Not even to worry about the weather conditions. And then for the most part, we're not going to stick with the kicker all season long. We're going to be playing matchups. I like using implied point totals when I'm searching for kickers throughout the season. That's easy to find. We have implied point totals for the season up on Draft Sharks right now, kind of ranking the offenses 1 to 32, who's projected to score the most by Vegas lines. That's a good thing to look at. Save it for your last pick or two, because you're going to be working the waiver wire. Grab a kicker on a good offense, and then, cross your fingers, hope you get lucky with a guy who kicks a bunch of field goals and not extra points that week.
And focusing on those implied points as opposed to fantasy points from last year can also help you avoid underrating kickers who were in good situations last year, but just got a bit unlucky by kicking a bunch of extra points because their teams were scoring a whole lot of touchdowns, as opposed to getting field goal chances instead when their teams came up short of the end zone. We see regression, positive and negative, on that front all the time. So be careful not to overrate a guy who didn't quite give you the kicker fantasy points last year, but is in a good offense. I know Jason Sanders for the Dolphins comes to mind there. And then Shane, on the defense side, we built in trust factor to the draft war room this year. And what that does for defenses is boosts those defenses that have good early matchups, because just like Jared alluded to with kicker, and even more so on defense, we're chasing matchups at least as much as we're chasing quality among our fantasy defenses, and maybe even more so in certain weeks, depending on the strength of the matchup, as well as the strength of the defense. But that's how you're drafting defense at the end of your draft, right?
Exactly. I think a lot of times in your home leagues, people they're just going to draft the best defenses 4 or 5 rounds early. No one's going to draft the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Well, they play against New England Patriots week 1, one of the worst offenses on paper, likely Jacoby Brissett or rookie and Drake May. You could draft them with the last round pick. And then week 2, we'll have an article on Draft Sharks every week of the best streaming options on defenses. You can pick up another one. So similar to what Jared said, where you're going to be streaming those kickers, do the same thing for defenses, and that's probably going to earn you more points than taking the 5th or 6th best defense in your draft and trying to stick with them all season long, especially if they end up playing the Chiefs or the Dolphins or some of these high-powered offenses.
To your point, I drafted the Seattle defense in my home league last night because they've got a home game against Denver in week 1. They're at New England in week 2. And I mean, like you said, Patriots look like probably one of the worst offenses, not just on paper, but on electronic screens, on grass, on whatever surface they're walking around on. And I've got their starting running back on this mock draft squad. So you can do all the practicing you want to do without even leaving draftsharks.com. You can go into the mock draft trainer with any one of your sync teams, mock with your actual league settings, practice as much as you want, or you can do like we did. You can use a draft war room to sync with an outside mock draft. We've added that this year. Even third-party mocks on sites like Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, you can use your draft war room to sync. You can get used to the functionality, used to seeing those recommendations, and used to using all of it while you're on the clock, so that you're just that much more ready by the time draft day rolls around. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and get all the insider information by subscribing to draftsharks.com. I feel absurd even saying it, but you can get this stuff right now for less than $5, which seems unfair. I feel like that's going to come out of my pocket, that we're not charging you more for that at some point, but go to draftsharks.com/subscribe right now. Get the details. You can check the show notes for this show for the link to that page, and just let us be your unfair advantage.